I see the numbers going up steadily. We're reaching close to 230. I think we had a pretty close to full registration for today, so that's very exciting. And again, I'd like to welcome those that are joining the workshop today. So I see the numbers growing. We're up to 87, so I'll just continue to give it a few more minutes so that people can join in. I hope everyone is doing well and is enjoying their day. And I know for sure I have been enjoying the warmer weather, so I hope everybody is doing well. Okay, I see that we probably have a few more people that are going to be joining us, but in the sake of time, I know that we have a pretty full agenda for today. So what I'm going to start off by doing is just introducing myself. And again, I'm going to say good afternoon and welcome to everybody for joining us today. And so my name is Candace Pete Cardozo, and I'm from the Little Pine First Nation, and so that's in Treaty 6 territory. I have been with the University of Saskatchewan for going on 14 years. I started my time here within the College of Agriculture and Bioresources, and I managed an Indigenous Lands and Resource training program. So a very exciting time. And for the past 2.5 years, I have been working within the Office of the Vice-Provost of Indigenous Engagement. Again, more exciting times. And in addition to myself, so today there is a co-host, and her name is Danielle Ellis. And she's an associate director within the Office of the Vice President Research, and she can expand on her introduction shortly. I'd like to provide a brief overview of today. So today the workshop series is named the Indigenous Research Workshop Series, and so it's a forum that's based on a collaboration between research acceleration and strategic initiatives. And so the acronym that I'm becoming more familiar with is RASI. And of course, we have the Office of the Vice Provost Indigenous Engagement and a number of different units from across the University of Saskatchewan. So we have Connection Point, Finance, and Research Services. So the goal of the second workshop is to share and highlight resources and tools. One of the things that I wanted to just mention briefly is that in addition to this goal that we have and see, an important message for today is that we also would like to recognize and acknowledge the diversity of our nations, and that when we think about today, that we are remembering that and taking that approach, of course, being very respectful. And I always like to say that when we think of working in this particular area, that there's a diversity of ways in which that we can form those respectful relationships with our communities and with our elders and knowledge keepers. So what I'm going to do before we head into the official agenda for today, I'd like to ensure that we start off in a good way and in a traditional, with a traditional opening by Bob Badger. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this off now to, my esteemed colleague here at the University of Saskatchewan, Bob. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to mute myself and hand it over to you, Bob.
Good afternoon. I want to say I'm happy to be a part of this initiative here this afternoon, and doing and talking about all these good things, for Indigenous people, Indigenous scholars, and also the university as well. I guess one of the things I wanted to explain before I go into my my song here is that traditionally Indigenous people, we always paid respect to the land, and we always gave land acknowledgements. And one of the things that my great grandpa used to do when I was a little boy, we would travel around, and he was a traditional leader, and his name was Jim Crow. And I've always wondered, why he did this when I was a little boy. He would stop just before we get into a different reserve, and he would put tobacco down before we went onto that land. So as I got older, I asked my grandpa, Grandpa, how come you always do that? Put tobacco down before we get to this reserve. And then he said, because that's their land. He said, that's Nut Lake land, that's Fishing Lake land, that's Kiniston land, like that. So there was always this acknowledgement of different First Nations lands. And my grandpa was very respectful to that, So today I find myself doing the same thing all the time. When I went to Australia, that's the first thing I did when I got to Australia, was I acknowledged the traditional land of the Aboriginal people there. And same thing when I went to Hawaii, that's the first thing I did, so I find myself doing that. And I'm going to acknowledge that the University of Saskatchewan sits on Treaty 6 territory and the land of many Indigenous nations. And I wanted to acknowledge that, at this time. And also, I wanted to share this song with everybody. And this song was shared to me by late Art Musuman of Mosquito First Nation. And he said that this song was composed shortly after the signing of treaties, so around 1876, somewhere in there. And this song talks about the Queen gave us this flag to fly in the wind forever. That's what this song means. It's a Cree song, but I'm Nakawe, I'm a Soto. But I'm going to share this song with you, just to give that acknowledgement to the Treaty 6 territory. So with that, friends and relatives, I just wanted to render that song, to pay respects, to the land and to the ancestors of Treaty 6 territory, And also, I wanted to encourage you, to hang in there, and be strong, we will all get through this pandemic, there's already light at the end of the tunnel there, So I just wanted to make that acknowledgement. Aho, miigwech.
I just want to say a very big thank you, Bob. Thank you very much for opening our workshop today. And so now we have Danielle on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Candace, and thank you very much, Bob. That was excellent. As Candace said, I'm Danielle Ellis, and I'm an Associate Director in RASI, Research Acceleration and Strategic Initiatives within the Office of the Vice President Research. Welcome to the USask Indigenous Research Workshop Series. This is the second workshop within that series, and it is called USask Protocols and Process, Engaging with Indigenous Elders and Participants. Today, we'll introduce you to practical logistics for engaging with Indigenous partners in research. We will be hearing about USask cultural protocols and stewardship, payment processes, and ethical considerations. Colleagues with expertise in all three areas will present key information that will help facilitate respectful engagement. There will be a brief question period following each of the three presentations. Before we get into the presentations, with no further ado, we've gotten here. Just want to go over a few housekeeping items. You may have already noticed we are recording the session. That is so that we're able to post it at a later date on the RASI website. Please type any questions you have in the Q&A box that's on the right-hand side of your screen. We're covering a lot of content today. We expect that there will be many questions, but unfortunately, we are unlikely to have time to only answer one or two during the actual workshop. Please be assured that we will follow up on all questions after the workshop, and we'll be developing an FAQ that will be posted online and shared more broadly across campus. And with no further ado, I send it back to Candace.
Thank you very much. And so I'd like to introduce our first theme. And so our first theme is titled Engaging with Indigenous Elders and Knowledge Keepers and those that might be working in that research area. And so you've met Bob already. He'll be participating in this workshop. In addition to Bob, we have Matthew Dunn, and he's our Indigenization and Reconciliation Coordinator here within the Office of the Vice-Provost Indigenous Engagement. And they can both choose to expand on a bit of their introductions. And I'm going to hand it over to the two of you. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Bob, for starting us off in such a good way today. Thank you, Danielle, as well, for co-hosting this event. So I've got a 10-minute presentation on engaging with cultural service providers, and then I'll pass it off to Bob for his portion. So you can go to the next slide, please. So I'll be referencing a draft document that, once complete, will be available in the Connection Point knowledge base. It is a guidance document titled How to Engage a Cultural Service Provider. So it's not a policy, it's not a formal procedure. So that's the comment there. If my audio is not clear, please just let me know. So this is a guidance document, and it is meant to be a living document as well that will get updated over time. So if people do have suggestions on ways to improve the documents, please let our office know or Connection Point know as well. Forgot to mention, my name is Matt Dunn. I am the Indigenization and Reconciliation Coordinator in the Office of the Vice Provost Indigenous Engagement. Okay, so the presentation, I'll be going through these 8 points, so we can go to the next slide, please. So when you want to engage with a cultural service provider, so an elder or a knowledge keeper, you first need to determine why you want a cultural service provider for your event, workshop, conference, or ceremony. And it's important to do this self-reflection just to make sure that there will be meaningful engagement with the cultural service provider. And it's important to do this to also avoid tokenism. So I've included a screenshot from a resource that is available online. The name of the resource is Authentic Engagement of First Nations and Métis Elders and Traditional Knowledge Keepers. And it's available on the Urban Aboriginal Knowledge Network. So it's a really excellent document that was developed by the Wachitowin Conference Committee in 2017. So if you do have some follow-up questions or are looking for information, I do recommend you check out that resource. So just reading from a portion of it, it says that it can be deemed disrespectful and inappropriate to simply ask a traditional knowledge keeper to provide an opening prayer. This is seen as tokenism. Their services and expertise should be utilized throughout the duration of the event or research. So please just keep that in mind when you are considering engaging with an elder or knowledge keeper. So if you move on to the next point. The second point is to connect with an appropriate cultural service provider and provide them with information about the event. It's important to do this so that the cultural service provider has enough information to make an informed decision about whether they want to participate. Maybe there's another elder or knowledge keeper who would be a better fit, depending on what your research is, what your event is. And if that's the case, then you need to provide them with enough information, with enough notice, so that they can reflect on that and then let you know. And if you're lucky, they might be able to direct you in the direction of someone else if they feel someone else would be a better fit. And next slide, please. All right, the third point, you'll need to ask the cultural service provider if they can support your event. And it's really important to ensure enough time for this part of the process, and a last minute request is not appropriate. So if your event is Friday and this particular item you haven't been able to get to, if your event's on the Friday and it's Monday, it's not going to work out. You do need to make sure you have 3 weeks notice. That gives the cultural service provider enough time to think about your request and let you know if they can participate. That also gives you enough time to make sure things are taken care of on your end. So that's filling out the honorarium request form so that you have the honorarium in hand on or before the event. And moving on to point 4. Be sure to inform the cultural service provider that you will ask them properly in person. So up until now, you haven't actually made the official ask and offered protocol yet. You've approached and started engaging with the cultural service provider. You've let them know about your research or your event. And then you're at the point where you're letting them know that you will be making the ask and a proper ask in person. And to do that, you need to know what their specific protocol is. Protocol varies from depending where you are in the country. It varies throughout the province from community to community, and it's really specific to the individual person that you want to work with. So it's at this point in time that you would ask the elder or the knowledge keeper what their preferred offering should be. And you do this ahead of time so that when you do make the ask in person, you are able to follow the proper protocol. And moving on to the next point. Now, traditional protocol for offering tobacco and or gifts must always be adhered to. We mentioned tobacco here. That could differ depending on the protocol, could be different, again, depending on the elder or knowledge keeper that you're working with. But this offering of protocol includes, but is not limited to, the provision of spiritual, cultural, ceremonial, historical information, or advice. And next slide, please. And now we're at the point where you've done the preparation, you've done the reflecting, you've out and started engaging with a cultural service provider. You're now ready to actually make the ask and offer the proper protocol. So the presentation of tobacco and or gifts or other protocol, if necessary, should take place when the cultural service provider is requested to support your event. So now you've actually made the ask, you've offered the protocol, and then there's just 2 more follow-up items. So the item number 7, the respectful offering of tobacco and or gifts must occur each time a cultural service provider is asked for their support. So if you worked with someone at say a conference or event last year and you would like to work with that same cultural service provider this year, you wouldn't need to go through proper protocol and make the ask again, along with providing that information. So going through, excuse me, going through those steps again. And then to the last point. So always greet the elder and provide someone designated to care and assist them. This could be in regards to transportation. If they don't drive, they'll need a way to get there, such as a taxi. If they are driving, you'll need to find a place for them to park. That could include getting them a parking pass. Seating requests, if it's an outdoor event or and they have mobility issues, you'll need to provide seating for them. Make sure that if they do have mobility issues, that you're not asking them to walk all the way across campus, and they might have other special requests. So you just need to make sure you're asking the cultural service provider if they do have any of those requests, and make sure that you do have someone who is designated to care and assist them. So just keep that in mind. If you're organizing a conference or another event, you'll be very busy on the day of. And so just make sure if you are not able to meet the elder knowledge keeper in person and be there to assist them, make sure you do have someone that is designated to do so. And with that, that is it for part of the presentation. So just these last few slides here show the remainder of that connection point document on how to engage a cultural service provider. It goes through some of the steps on using connection point to fill out the honorarium request, the information that you'll need, including now that with COVID, you'll have the direct deposit, so you need all of the banking information for that. And the honorariums, we do recommend $300 for a half day and $600 for a full day. So that is to appropriately compensate the cultural service provider for their time. So even if your event is an hour or two, we still recommend that half day honorarium in the event that the elder or knowledge keeper has to do some preparation work either before or after your event. And I think there's just one more slide. This is just a screenshot of the connection point honorarium request. So connection point will be going through that later on during their presentation. And with that, I'm done my portion and I will pass it off to Bob Badger.
Okay, like was said here earlier on, my name is Bob Badger. I'm the Cultural Resource Coordinator at the University of Saskatchewan. So I'm just going to dive right into it, and I just wanted to make an acknowledgement towards the organizers. Thank you for all your hard work. First thing I want to talk about is the usage of tobacco. You know, there's a lot of things out there. People have teachings, and certain things like that about tobacco. So not all First Nations or Indigenous communities utilize tobacco for offerings. So from coast to coast to coast, we have really a lot of different language groups, cultures, tribal affiliations, and things like that here in Canada. And one thing to remember is the diversity of Indigenous peoples and how we interact amongst each other. So first and foremost, tobacco is utilized on many different, levels. So I have some tobacco here. This is pipe tobacco that we utilize, and then also there are these companies that are actually providing I guess pure tobacco, traditional tobacco. And they come in these real nice little cans, little packages and stuff like that. So that's the tobacco piece, and then also I have some traditional tobacco that I use, so this is actually pure tobacco as well too. And depending on the elder and I guess or the cultural service provider, you could ask them what they prefer. Some elders, they prefer tobacco like in the pouch form, and then some prefer cigarettes, like the smoking cigarettes, So and then some people don't use tobacco as offerings as well too. Some people use cedar for an offering, or they use sweetgrass for an offering, or sage. Different traditionalists have different ways, and that's one of the things that you always have to be cognizant about while engaging in Indigenous communities. So and the way we were told by our elders and our old people, that tobacco is an offering, and it's seen as a spiritual contract between you, the community, the land, and the creator. So all those elements are in there as well too. So think about it like that. That tobacco is a sacred contract. And then also when you hand tobacco to an elder, you don't just put it in front of them and say, here's some tobacco. You put it in their hand like that, and then you give it to them in a respectful way. And the way we were told, is as a person asking a question to an elder, what you do is you hold your tobacco like this first, and then you approach an elder and you say, "Excuse me, Mr. or Mrs. Elder, I want to know about this. I want to know about that. Let's say I want to know about land and water and stuff like that. Could you answer these questions for me if I offer you this tobacco?" You know, and we were told not just to put tobacco in a person's hand and then ask them the question after. So those kind of teachings, you know, like because maybe that elder is specializes in childcare and they don't have too much connection to the land. So what they'll do is they'll refer you to an elder that knows about those things. So it's always important to keep that in mind, you know. And then also in many indigenous communities across, you know, North America, we utilize these plants as well. So here's a little bit of sage that I wanted to show you folks. You know, here's some sage. So this sage is a prairie sage, and a lot of times we utilize the sage in ceremony as well. And then also we have sweetgrass as well too. So here's a braid of sweetgrass that I bring for you to look at, you know, and smell, you know, smell-o-vision, you know, like that. And then to show you kind of like the bottom part here, it's always purple, you know, like that. So we utilize sweetgrass in many ceremonies, and then also we utilize cedar. So what we do is we go out into the woods and we pick cedar boughs, you know, and then we strip those little cedar things, I guess needles, and then here's kind of a close-up look of the cedar, you know. So what we do is we put those plants, you know, these special plants, we put them on charcoal and ashes, and then we have a smudge, you know. So as researchers, you might be invited to participate in a smudge. So I put some sage here on some charcoal here, and then when you smudge, what you do is you remove your ball cap and your glasses, and maybe if you have jewelry, you know, things like that, and then what you do is you take your hands and then you bring the smoke over yourself like that. You smudge yourself, you know, like that. And you smudge your heart, and you smudge your eyes and your mouth, you know, and your hands like that. So my old people, they shared with me that when we take part in a smudging like that, you know, that we're cleaning ourselves spiritually, you know, we're cleaning our spirit. So when we enter into a discussion with someone, that we enter into this discussion with a clean mind and a clean heart and a clean mouth, you know, just good intentions, you know. So that's the smudge part, you know. And you know, to kind of share with you how these different plants, how they smell, you know, they have different pungent odors, you know, they have nice sweet aromas, you know, things like that. So just to let you know that if anybody's allergic to and stuff like that, you know, just to be mindful that you share with your I guess your elders that you are engaging with. So also another thing is that you might be invited to ceremonies out in community, and these ceremonies they're vast. There's so much different kinds of ceremonies out there, but a good rule of thumb is to travel around with some items. So you want to go around with maybe for the ladies, you want to go around with maybe a sweat gown, you know, so that if you're invited into a sweat lodge, and a change of clothing and a towel and a cushion or a blanket to sit on. And same thing with the men, you know, so go around with a sweat shorts and then also a towel, you know, and things like that. And then also you might be invited to a feast, so go around with a cup, a spoon, a bowl, you know, and the cutlery, you know, and things like that. You know, make sure you take your things along, that because you might be invited to a feast, because Indigenous people, we love to feast and eat, you know, like that. And then also to talk about giveaways as well too. And some of the things that that I've seen as a young boy, elders would receive as an offering, you know, would be food boxes, axes, ribbons, cloth, monetary cash, you know, hides, horses, guns, personal time, wood, water, mirrors, different plants, feathers, and so on, you know. So some cultures share the wealth as a sign of respect. And the act of giving was seen as a virtue that is highly respected amongst many indigenous cultures across North America. You know, so it's important to remember those kind of things. You know, and working with community is about building relationships and cultivating a lifelong friendship with community and individuals. And as a researcher, you know, this is a good time for you to learn about how to improve your skills as a researcher. You know, and a lot of times what happens is researchers, they parachute into a community and then they leave without saying goodbye or see you around, you know. And it's a good rule of thumb, you know, to make sure you continue to take care of these relationships, you know. And that land, language, and culture are three pillars of Indigenous existence, whether we are immersed in it or not. These three pillars complement each other by making diverse connections. Like it's kind of like a spider's web, you know. So all of these things are connected, you know. And if one is disturbed, then everything else is disturbed. So think about it like that, you know. And I always tell people, you know, when working with Indigenous communities, just walk in with respect and understanding and humility and embrace the community, because you will find out that Indigenous people love to tease and invite you to come and be a part of their lives, you know. So embrace that, you know. And you know, like I just want to share those things, and my time is up. So I want to say thank you, Miigwech, Miminik.
Thank you very much, Matt and Bob. We really appreciate you helping out today. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Naomi to see if we may have some questions in the Q&A. If we can, Naomi, if there are any questions, can you please flag those with us? And we can direct them to Matt and to Bob.
Yeah, hi there. Just a reminder to all the attendees, on the bottom right-hand corner, you will find a little area where you can put in a question for either Matt or Bob as part of the presentation. They're here as an excellent resource, and there's no questions there at the moment, but maybe I could just put in a little quick question to Bob. How important is language if you're approaching an elder or a community member? Say my first language is Cree, but I'm going into a different community. So what would be a type of advice that you could provide to me if I was to go into a different neighboring community?
I guess usually what we do, like as an Indigenous person, when I go to a different area, like let's say I'm going down to the Navajo reservation down in Arizona, what I like to do is I like to get myself acquainted with the folks down there, you know, like hey, you know, how do you say hello, you know? So the Navajos, they say ya te, you know. So I will go down there and I'll start to engage like that, you know, just to create kind of like a comfort zone and stuff like that, that where I could communicate with them, and then they look at me and they say, oh, okay, yeah. But I'm not Navajo, and they know it, you know. But I'm trying to learn their culture and their language. So you know, as researchers, you know, personally myself, I think researchers should, you know, go out and find out, how people greet each other in the community and how they relate to one another, and stuff like that. And like I said, Indigenous people love humor, so they'll start teasing you and start, calling you, different names and stuff like that. But it's because they're accepting you, into their community. And I guess at the end of the day, just do your homework. Do your homework and find out which community you're going into. Like, let's say if you're gonna go and work with the Haudenosaunee people in Ontario, so you would, prior to going there, you would learn some of the words, That's what I would suggest.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. We do have a couple more questions coming in. And I'm just wondering if we want to just quickly have time for one more question. Candace, is there more time?
I think it's a good idea if we go to that one question, and then in the sake of time, we'll just we'll move on. So if you could pose that, that would be great.
Excellent. Okay, so I guess one of the questions that came in, I'm just trying to come back to, Daryl had a question. As a lung doctor, I had trouble getting tobacco for an elder, but I understood the meeting. Are there other gifts beyond sweetgrass or sage? This tobacco gift can be a problem.
I think maybe, Bob, if we can have you answer that question. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. When I was talking there, I shared some of the gifts that you could actually share with in Indigenous elders and stuff like that. So what I used to see when I was a boy was they would take a food box to the elder, put some food in there, maybe some non I guess just some items, of food to put in a box and take it to them for an offering. And then what I used to see too is they'll give them an axe or a knife, or they would give them something of value that the elder could use, like that. Maybe a load of wood, I don't know, so a suggestion is just to find out what they enjoy, what they like, and then you could give that as an offering.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I think you cut out just a little bit for me towards the end there.
Yeah.
So what I just wanted to flag for folks is that I know that we always have many questions, many different types of questions. And so what we're going to be working on is probably maybe sometimes in February, March, we're going to work on having an ongoing type of conversation, having an online virtual type of we haven't thought of a name yet, but we know it's going to be informal. We're going to, it's going to be open, just so that people have the opportunity to ask those questions. And again, we're going to make sure that it's something that we continue to do so that people have that opportunity to be able to ask those questions. So Bob will be leading those open houses, I'll call them for now. So what I'd like to do in the sake of time is just to move on. Thank you again, Bob, and to Matt. And we're going to hand off this to Danielle now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to move on right away to the next theme that we'll be discussing today, which is payment process. I am delighted to introduce Jan Peace, Director of Connection Point, and Trevor Batters, Director of Financial Services. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank everyone for welcoming us and inviting us to share some time this afternoon with you. So we can advance to the next slide if you would like, Naomi. Great. Through our presentation, we hope to share with you some of the following information. So what honorariums and research participant fees actually are, how you request them, what information is required when you request those payments, and how tax is applied in each of those processes. We want to leave you with resources so you know where to go for more information including knowing that you can always reach out to our offices if you have a question or just aren't sure how to proceed. So we'll start with honorariums. Honorariums are the form of payment that we use to provide payments to elders and cultural knowledge keepers, cultural service providers. To request a payment, we ask that you submit the honorarium electronic form. We call these forms e-forms in the Connection Point Services PAWS portal. Matt had shown a screenshot a little bit earlier. I'll actually go into the system and show you where to find those as well, just in a few minutes. Now, if your honorarium recipient has expenses that you need to reimburse, such as expenses for travel or supplies, we do ask that you submit those separately and send those to us on the request a reimbursement e-form, so we can get those expenses reimbursed directly to the individual, and then that reimbursement will not show up on their T4A come tax time. So we just ask that those come through separate. The e-forms themselves do walk you through the required information, such as when you need a social insurance number and how to submit direct deposit information to ensure quick and smooth payment processing. It is important to submit your request as early as possible, as these payments are only issued semi-monthly and do follow a set payment and deadline schedule. So the sooner you get those requests in, the better. If you know you have an event happening, a month or two from now, go ahead and submit that to us. Let us know the date, and we'll make sure you have that payment in hand so you're ready to go on the date of your event. We can go ahead to the next slide, Naomi. Thank you. So we all know the payment process can be complicated. That's one of the reasons why we're joining you today. And there's times when it can be quite difficult given your unique situation. So please just remember that we're here to help, and the sooner you reach out to us, the more likely we will be able to solution some alternatives and provide you with some options. Some of the examples that we have seen in the past include situations where an individual maybe isn't able to obtain the social insurance number, or somebody just isn't quite sure who they're going to be engaging with until they arrive in community, so they don't know who to make the payment out to. Or the individual that you're engaging with actually cannot accept that direct deposit or check, so you require cash in advance in hand. So if you find yourself in any of these situations or other ones perhaps that we haven't seen yet in the past, please just reach out to us and we'll try to figure out how to help you and get you going so you're ready for your engagement and to make that payment. We'll switch gears now to the research participant fees. Depending on the timing of your request, we can actually provide these funds to you ahead of time so you aren't out of pocket, or as an alternative, we can provide them after the fact to reimburse you for fees that you've already provided to your research participants. These payments are made to the researcher, preferably by direct deposit, but alternatively by check. So some important things to note when requesting research participant fees, I'm having trouble with that word today, is that your research has to already have been approved, and you will actually be asked to include that research ethics number on the form when you submit the request to us for payment. These payments are generally small in nature, $100 or less per participant, and they can be in the form of cash, gift cards, or other small gifts. It's important to know also that you're required to maintain a record of your research participants, but you do not need to submit that to us. In order to get your reimbursement, you just need to keep it within your own files for, I believe it's upwards of 7 years. So to request this payment, you simply complete the request form, which I'm going to show you just in a minute, and email that to us at Connection Point for processing. So now we're going to try, between Naomi and I, to switch control of the screen here. And I'll go actually into PAWS and show you where you can find these e-forms, the research form, and also other helpful knowledge-based articles. Okay, I hope this has worked. Maybe just somebody shout out and let me know if it isn't working. Otherwise, I'll assume that it is. So this is what it looks like when you log into PAWS.
Jan?
Yes?
Just a quick note, it's Candace, and I was just going to let you know that on my screen I see it says starting to share content. So I don't know, maybe if it's just my connection, but if someone else could maybe just flag for Jayan whether or not it's showing up for folks.
This is Danielle, and I'm not seeing it yet either. So just
Okay, it might be a slow connection. Mine says that it's sharing. We want to just give it a few seconds, see if it catches up to us. Otherwise, I can just speak to it.
Sure, let's maybe give it another minute. I'm not quite sure. I'll just try one more person. Naomi, I'm not quite sure if you're able to see what Jayan is sharing on her screen.
Hi there. Yeah, Jan, it's not uploading. You might want to just defer back to the PowerPoint presentation.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Naomi.
Okay. So since I can't show you in real time, if after this anybody wants a little bit of a demo or some more information about our Connection Point Services portal in PAWS, just reach out to us and we can do that one-on-one or with a group. But essentially, when you get to our portal in PAWS, and it is called Connection Point Help and Services, there'll be a button that you can click that says Submit Request or Search Knowledge Base. If you click on that button, it'll bring you to another screen where you can enter a variety of information into a search bar. So as an example, if you enter the word elder, you'll be provided with some knowledge base articles that provide some information when it comes to engaging with elders, providing payments. There's a variety of information there. You can scroll through many pages. They load 3 articles at a time, and you should be able to find some helpful information in those articles. Just below that in the search, it'll actually provide you with direct links to some of these e-forms or electronic forms. They're the way that people across campus can request our services. So the first one that will pop up if you search just based on the word elder is actually the honorarium form. So if you click into that form, it prompts you through the information that you need to submit the request for payment, and also links you to important information about the process, such as direct deposit information requirements and deadlines and payment schedules. If you go back to that search bar and enter research participants, it'll come up. Your first 2 results will actually be the guidelines, and the second result will be the funding request form itself, which is just a PDF form that you can complete and email to us at Connection Point for us to provide the funds to you. On our main landing page in PAWS, there'll be a button under the Connection Point channel that just says training. If you click on that, it'll actually bring you to our university training site where you can sign up for a Connection Point Services overview session, where we go into great detail about all of our services and the PAWS portal, if that happens to be of interest to you. So not as good as showing a demo live, but hopefully enough information to get you to the right place. And again, if you're not able to, just give us a call and we'll help you get there for sure. We can go to the next slide now. Naomi, thank you. So we thought it would be good just to provide a list of some articles that we think would be of interest to this group. I believe these slides are going to be shared after, so if you actually start showing the slideshow, these links are live, so if you click on them, they'll take you directly to these articles. And then on the next page is just, or pardon me, on the next slide is a summary of some of the e-forms that I talked about today. And I also included a link to our general request form. You can use that form to ask us questions about these processes, any Connection Point services and processes, or just any questions that you have. And if you're just not sure who to call or where to go, you can send them our way and we'll help you out as well. Alternatively, you can phone us at 966-2000. And once we resume on-campus operations, you can stop by and visit us in 258 Arts. And then that Connection Point Services overview link at the bottom will again just take you directly to that training page. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Trevor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Jan, for walking through the process. The one thing that I really wanted to be able to do is to help, I guess, provide a picture of some of the rationale behind why the processes exist the way they are. One of my roles is managing the university's relationship with CRA and taking care of the various tax considerations. I know that's everyone's favorite topic. But I wanted to just provide a little bit of information very quickly to provide some context as to why we have some of the processes in place, because I know Jan's team gets lots of questions about that. So one of the key things to be aware of is, from a CRA perspective, payments made as honorariums or research participant fees, or when we give gifts instead of paying fees, CRA sees those to be income. So they don't see those as being gifts. They consider that to be service income that's received by the knowledge keeper or the elder or the cultural service provider that we're providing that payment to. So for those reasons, it comes with some tax reporting requirements that sit with the university that certainly make some of these processes and making it as respectful as possible sometimes a bit more challenging. So a couple things to be aware of. These payments, the university is required to report this income that's paid on a T4A form. So it's very similar to the T4 that you'd get for employment, but this is a non-employment form if you've never seen them before. And we provide those forms and produce them in any circumstance where an individual has received $500 or more during the calendar year. So if we're making small payments to individuals that add up to $500, the CRA requirements is that the university report that those payments when they reach that $500 level. So that particularly applies to honorariums. We have put some special processes in place around research participant payments. So by following the $100 process that's been set out kind of as our standard process, by keeping it to that $100 or less, we're operating under sort of a general conclusion that if we're paying participants for engaging and participating in that research, that we're probably not hitting that $500 level, which is why you're not required to submit their names and their information or social insurance numbers for those payments. So where we do need to work with research participants and pay them more than those $100 processes, we'll do a bit of a review to evaluate whether we're going to be paying them over that $500 threshold. Perhaps it's a group of people who are unlikely to be participating in other research from university researchers. So we'll have to look at those on a case-by-case basis to determine whether we might have to actually make those payments in a different way and or track them from a tax perspective. So that's behind sort of driving some of our processes. If we go to the next slide, while we do report those, the one thing to be aware of is, as a rule, there's generally never income tax withheld on those payments. They are treated as service payments on the reporting of the T4A, but the university does not withhold any income tax on those. So for those people who are concerned about work on reserve, for those individuals who might be providing these services and have status, they would not be taxed and would be able to report that as non-taxable income based on their own personal tax situations. One complication that CRA certainly provides is as it relates to non-cash gifts. So this is not applying to certainly the gifts provided in the context of the cultural protocols and the gifts in engaging and out of respect to those knowledge keepers, cultural service providers, but rather this is if, unfortunately, we're not able to circumvent the tax processes by providing a non-cash payment. So if we provide a gift in lieu of providing a cash direct deposit check payment, CRA does consider those to be taxable and does require those to be reported on a T4A as well. The last item I wanted to highlight that adds some twist to the process from a tax perspective is the challenges and the requests around social insurance numbers. So for reporting purposes, the university has to be able to demonstrate and document that we've made attempts to request and or receive a social insurance number. So certainly I do know researchers and others have run into situations where they are working with individuals who do not have social insurance numbers, who are not able to or do not wish to provide those social insurance numbers. And in those cases, what we ask researchers to do is to document the processes they've gone through to request those social insurance numbers. And that becomes part of sort of the record keeping so that we could justify to CRA if they come to us asking to do an audit or asking why that information has not been provided. So with that, I just wanted to provide some of those tax highlights. It's certainly not exciting. It's not things that we hope people need to worry about, but I do think it helps give some context as to the regulatory challenges that we need to work within.
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you, Jan. I'm just going to see if there were any questions that came. Naomi, is there anything on the Q&A specific for Trevor and Jan?
There, so I just stopped sharing my screen. So I'm just gonna scroll down here and see if we have any tax information or questions. I guess I haven't come across any. We have a really easy question here from Nathan Miles. Sorry, what is CRA?
My apologies, my acronym soup. The Canada Revenue Agency, who's the government tax arm.
Excellent. And we have another question here from Olga. In my discipline, it is normal to work with research participants many times over the course of many years. So it's common to get over the $500 boundary. How is it best to approach this?
Yes, so the $500 threshold is specific to a calendar year. So if there are payments being made throughout that longer term working with those individuals, that is less of a concern. Where it's expected that we would pay those individuals more than that $500 during the year, that would work. The question would sort of be routed through Connection Point to identify a process so that we could make those payments, but it may require actually tracking and reporting that information.
Perfect. We have another question from Alana. Is there any stipulation around purchasing e-gift or cards for students, for example, for a meal?
I guess in the context of providing gift cards for research participant payments and thinking of that context, then no. As we get into thinking about gift cards as gifts for whether it's students, employees, sometimes those tax requirements become a little bit more complicated, but certainly in the context of research and providing those to students is less problematic. Where it really becomes an issue is where it relates to anybody who might be an employee.
Perfect. Thank you, Trevor. I do have one more question here, just going through from Christy. Is there a standard rate for honorarium, for example, for elders?
So I think, yeah, I that was covered a little bit by Matt earlier. Jan, did you have your, I'll let you speak to that. I know you
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, Matt had talked about that a little bit in his presentation earlier about the standard rates, and they're also included in that that document. There is that link, that how to engage an elder or cultural service provider document. Matt, I believe it was 300 for, was it 300 for half a day, 600 for a full day is the recommended amount?
That's correct.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions for now, Danielle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Naomi. I'm going to thank Jan and Trevor for their wonderful presentations, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Candace.
Thank you very much. I was going to talk just briefly before we head into our next presentation and our third theme. And one of the hopes that we also had for today, or in terms of goals, was to really also to place a face to a name. And so hopefully throughout the presentation, so when I think of those that have gone, that have presented this afternoon, I think about Matt and his role in that area of system-wide learning. And so he's working in that area of, development of policy and tools. And so, so when I think about Bob presenting, I think of him as, and that is his role in that area of cultural protocols and providing advice and guidance in that area as well. And when we think about Jan and we think about Connection Point, and that's where, there's so much information there. so many different tools in the knowledge base that people can access. And then when we think about Trevor, I think about his role in terms of that area of advice and guidance as well. When we think about the tax implications, not always sometimes a difficult conversation, some hard questions in those particular areas. So tax implications when we think about honoraria payments and research payments. And so I just wanted to add that briefly. And so now what I'd like to do is we'll move into that, our third theme. And so that theme is ethical considerations. And we have Dr. Diane Martz, who is going to be presenting, and her position is responsible conduct of research specialist. And so she works out of the Office of the Vice President Research. And we also have Dr. Benita Beatty, who is here, who is a faculty member in Indigenous Studies here at the University of Saskatchewan, and also is listed as an Indigenous faculty member working in that area of research ethics. So thank you very much again for your participation, and I'm going to hand it off to our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Candace, for the introduction, and also thank you to Bob and Matt for the opening the meeting in a good way, and to both of them for bringing up the issue of diversity, which is one that's really important to us in the context of research ethics. I'm also, as Candace mentioned, I'm the Behavioral Research Ethics Board Chair, and Benita is one of our behavioral RAB members. So we're dealing with these kinds of issues on an ongoing basis. So hopefully we can bring some of that experience to help you out. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering why we actually have these specific guidelines for research with Indigenous people and communities. And actually, really, it's based on a history of research that was not beneficial to Indigenous people, and in some cases, it was actually harmful to them. Research involving Indigenous communities and Indigenous people was typically, carried out by non-Indigenous researchers who didn't talk to the communities they were working with or working in. They didn't engage people. They didn't try to understand what the needs of the communities were. They didn't necessarily understand the worldviews of the communities and so on. So we had quite a long period of time where Indigenous communities really felt that that research didn't serve them very well. So some of the things that we could list out, and you can find much longer lists than this out there, but a lack of research a lack of respect for Indigenous protocols and cultural practices, no community input or direction to the research, no reporting back. And that was something called helicopter research that people talked about, where a researcher would helicopter sort of into a community, use the people for their research project, and then leave, and the people and the community never ever heard anything back from them, or they would promise things that they never actually delivered. Sometimes the data was presented in a manner that stigmatized communities and even hurt them in terms of their ability to borrow money, in terms of their ability to negotiate treaties, and so on. And there were also lots of instances of the appropriation of traditional knowledge. Next slide. So in response to some actual cases in Canada, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research actually created a document called the CIHR Health Research with Indigenous People back in 2007. That was created with quite a bit of consultation with Indigenous people and Indigenous organizations across Canada. It actually is still available online at the URL that's listed there. But that was replaced in 2010 by Chapter 9 of the Tri-Council Policy Statement. And it hasn't actually been revised to any extent since then. And the panel on research ethics is actually looking at what potential revisions need to be done to this fairly soon, I think. The other thing that's out there that could be useful is a module that goes with the TCPS core tutorial. It's not interactive in the sense that the rest of the core tutorial is, but there is a module, an educational piece out there to try to help people when they plan their research involving First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people of Canada. And I've included the URL there. Beyond that, these are sort of in the domain of organizations that fund research. There's also guidelines from the different groups out there. There's a National Inuit Strategy on Research. There's Principles of Ethical Métis Research. There's the OCAP documents from the First Nations Information Governance Center. And individual communities or First Nations may also have documents. There may, at the provincial level, at the community level, and so on. So it's really critical to engage with the community that you want to work with to understand, what's out there and what is there to guide you in as you design and develop your research with the community. Next one. So I'm going to talk specifically about the Tri-Council Policy Statement, Chapter 9. And it's a very large chapter with a lot of articles, so we're going to have to do this in a very quick way. But TCPS 2 has some fundamental principles. One is respect for persons, which is about honoring a person's capacity to make free and informed decisions. And in the context of Indigenous research, and actually beyond that, this also includes communities. In the Indigenous case, it includes concerns for continuity as people with distinctive cultures and identities, and it goes beyond the scope of ethical protection for individuals to try to interconnect between humans and the natural world, obligations to future generations, and so on. So Chapter 9 kind of takes the basic TCPS principles and extends them to try to be relevant in the cultural context of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, recognizing that there's huge diversity among these communities, as Bob and Matt have pointed out. And that's actually one of the criticisms of the TCPS 2 that's been voiced, is that it kind of takes a pan-Indigenous perspective in Canada and glosses over to some extent all that diversity that's out there. And that again is another reason why it's so critical to engage in a meaningful way with the communities that you want to be working with, and to build a relationship and understand what that community needs. Next slide, please, Naomi. As mentioned, there's 22 articles, and you can sort of see that I've tried to group them into some of the different topics. Community engagement is a big one. You'll see that about almost half of the articles actually speak about community engagement. Respect for communities, community customs and codes of practice. Again, it kind of connects back to what Bob and Matt were talking about. But there is a requirement really that researchers have an obligation to be informed about and to respect the relevant customs and codes of research practice that apply in the communities that they hope to work with. Participatory research, when it's possible, sort of to bring the community in, understand their needs, make them part of the research team, and so on and so forth. Discussions around confidentiality and privacy or acknowledgement. This one is an interesting, something the Research Ethics Board often wrestles with in the context of trying to build as much community input and participation in the research as possible, but also to balance that off against the protection of privacy of the people who consent to be part of research. So that sometimes requires some really significant thought about how can you accomplish all these different things at the same time. There's also some discussion around how you disseminate and interpret results. And basically what the TCPS is saying there is you need to, again, engage the community in in what the results actually say and what they mean and how you're going to put those results out to the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that the community can suppress results, but in our experience, that's actually never happened. But that discussion about what those results means actually improves your own results as a researcher, because you understand a lot better what your data is telling you, and figuring out the best ways to disseminate research in ways that are meaningful to the people who've been your participants in the community that's worked with you, as well as the wider public and so on, is quite an important thing. Control over cultural and traditional knowledge, control over data and biological samples are both something I might talk about if we have time at the end. And the last one here is a couple of articles that really focus on community benefits from research, and Benita is going to talk now about the community engagement and community benefits perspective. So I'm going to pass it over to Benita.
Yeah, I think you can hear me. Hope you can hear me. I noticed a few of them that had some issues hearing, and I had some also. Now, good. I'm actually in the north. I'm with the Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation, and I live up north, and I also live, of course, go back and forth in Saskatoon and so on. But one of the things I've always, which is why I got into the ethical piece, is that a lot of my research has been in the communities, and I know there's a lot of differences, and I'm so glad that and thank them for that. Bob earlier on, the first presentation talked about respecting the distinctions and the differences across the various First Nation and communities. And I can say also for the Métis communities as well are quite different. And I know that in the north, we have very distinct regions, remote regions. And so a lot of my own research has to do with remote. So looking at community engagement varies across the province. It varies geographically, and distance and access become issues. Of course, now with COVID, whoever has we engage primarily virtually now, which makes it a lot harder, but nonetheless, engagement is a requirement and is certainly, I think, the leading piece with even TCPS Chapter 9, but certainly a leading piece even with the First Nations Information Governance Center, with First Nations across Canada. They've looked at engagement as a requirement for self-determination, the self-government piece. And people are starting to look at Indigenous peoples, meaning the Aboriginal peoples in Canada, being the Indian, Métis, and Inuit in Canada, is of course a constitutional definition, but the need for them to be able to control and the whole OCAP issues, to have some say in the research that's done with them, and that they participate in, and to be able to use and have access to their own data. And of course, there's a difference between biological, the more invasive kind of data as opposed to the behavioral ethics. And of course, we're on the behavioral ethics piece, but just keeping in mind that why it's important to engage respectfully is because we're dealing with a lot of planes here, both the governance planes and as well as the ethical privacy and other issues. So it's never an easy thing, but it's also a real learning opportunity for people, and it's good to engage with others as well when you're dealing with various communities, especially if you're not familiar with them. And I know I always run into that myself in communities I'm not familiar with. So here engagement is required when it's going to affect the welfare of the community or the communities, and to which any of the participants are belong, or the target group. And whenever there is research conducted on First Nations, Inuit, or Métis lands, and also that recruitment criteria that includes Indigenous identity as a factor for the entire study or a subgroup of their study, Also, required and research seeks input from participants regarding a community's cultural heritage, artifacts, traditional knowledge, or anything that's distinct or unique to them, unique characteristics. Particularly where Indigenous identities or membership in an Indigenous community is used as a variable for the purpose of analysis of the research data. And this is why it's always good. I've seen a lot of researchers and have started using it myself over the past, I'd say, decade. Advisory groups, community advisory groups, to help me from the start to the finish, and to be able to work with them. And I've seen a lot of that kind of example happen. And the other aspect of community engagement is whenever you're doing an interpretation of research results that refer to Indigenous communities, their history, their language, their culture, their way of life, because it's quite different. The way of life, even economic livelihood, is quite different. And certainly the aspect of treaties is an important part. It's not included in there, but it becomes a significant thing in certain communities. So what is it generally? And I think Diane sort of talked about that, and I know it's been sort of discussed before with Matthew and with Bob earlier. It's the idea of community engagement is the establishing a respectful relationship and between researchers and an Indigenous community, the taking time to build a relationship, learning about them, listening to them, including the community in various modes, various methods of doing that. And I've seen some very innovative methods that people have used. Ensuring that research reflects community needs and priorities. And sometimes the research that comes from a community ask, a community requests certain types of things. So that's an example of that. And ensuring also, of course, in any relationship, respectful relationship, there's long-term collaboration commitment. And how does one engage with the relevant community? Well, as I mentioned before, remoteness, access, geographical communities. Geography becomes an important part. Where are they situated, located, and so on, because land determines culture and how people make a living and a livelihood on the land or where they are. The plains, even the Cree. There's various language distinctions for example, we in the northeast area of Saskatchewan, we speak the Woodland Cree, the TH dialect. We say Nida. The Plains Cree say Nia. The Swampy Cree would say Nina. So there's various dialects, and really is their community culture can be quite different, and not just culture in terms of beliefs, but culture in terms of their way of life. So that's why it's important to get to know people in a respectful relationship. So geographical communities, getting to know the formal leadership, particularly depending on the kind of research that you're doing, should be always good to know. I always say the lay of the land. So the political and the elders, and also in the urban communities, looking at how in political organizations have various ways of organizing themselves. There's certainly local, regional, which are the tribal council, more regional, and then of course provincial organizations. So start to look at who provides services or who is involved within particular urban communities. And that takes a little research on your own to start doing that and asking around and so forth, but people are fairly helpful. And certainly communities of interest as well, and organizations, for instance, the friendship centers, for example. So there's different types of organizations that provide various types of public services. And when you engage the relevant community, especially provincial data, there are issues, and some of them are legislatively protected, and some of them, of course, are public data. So there's issues there, but these are the reasons why engagement becomes an important component. And so some of the benefits from the research should be relevant to community needs and priorities, and that it should benefit the participating community. As I said, sometimes the community asks that, whether it's the geographical community, for example. I do a lot of research myself that comes out of asks from the community in particular areas, in particular populations, vulnerable populations in my case. And so I've done a lot of stuff on long-term care, for example, over the years, and in Indigenous communities. So that's an example, and that's why I got involved with an example with SPORE, which is patient-oriented research, which goes to the individual level and also at the various broader levels. So, you know, that's why relevancy becomes an important thing, and the notion of reciprocity, working with people and ensuring that something is practically beneficial to them is always a good goal. And also extending, you know, this idea of enhancing the literature is always a goal for scholars, researchers, you know, especially when there are very various gaps in the literature when a person is trying to find out about information on a particular topic or area of interest that they're in. And they should always provide and support, at least support capacity building. And capacity building, of course, is another term that has a very broad range of activities that could be associated with it, and people have done various things. And that usually comes about and emerges as you're engaging with people locally or at the whatever level that your research has taken you. And but it's basically to build the skills of communities so that they're able, perhaps they can be researchers, perhaps the students can be researchers, but they're also community based researchers as well, so that they're familiar with methodology, they're familiar with project management, ethics, and just a note as well on ethics. I know Diane mentioned the ethical considerations from you know, through the Métis and so on, the TCFS Chapter 9 and the whole area of OCAP and so on, which is kind of, some of it is rolled into TCPS, but one of the things as well too is sometimes the communities have their own ethics. Like for instance, our band, which is the Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation, our health services incorporated has, if we're doing any health research, which I do quite a bit of, we also have to present to the board to get their approval for anything that we do so that we can work with them. So that's why for me, I kind of like to rely upon people asking, but certainly I've had situations when in different provinces that I've had to, where I didn't know people that, and I had to engage and get to know them, as Bob said, simply asking around, getting to know them. That's an important thing, and making sure that there's some reciprocity that they see, you know, that is going to benefit them, because there's no use in doing research if there's no practical outcome also for all people that are engaged. So I don't know. I think that's about it on my end, Diane.
Yeah. So thanks, Benita. I think we'll probably stop there just because of time. But one of the things I did want to say is that we at the REB, we do sort of draw guidance from Chapter 9, but we also recognize that there are potentially situations that it doesn't really address very well, given the sort of pan-Indigenous perspective of it. So we definitely are always willing to talk about, you know, about how this doesn't meet your needs and you need to discuss with us another way of doing things. And we have found that our researchers in Saskatchewan have a much different set of sort of community norms they're working with than, say, our researchers out in BC. And we have to, as an ethics board, be pretty cognizant of that so that we don't totally ruin a research project that's going on in BC with our demands. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Diane and Benita. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just check in with Naomi to see if there are any questions for our last presenters.
Hi there. So thank you, Benita and Diane, for presenting on ethics. I just want to remind everybody that the question and answer box is on the bottom right-hand corner there. We have a question from Julianne. Who would you include in a community advisory group?
I guess, Diane, did you want to include, you're familiar with this too. Did you want to answer or do you want me to answer?
You go ahead, you do this, so.
Well, the community advisory group, it really depends, you know, because you don't want to have a big one because you'll end up not being able to do the kind of work that you need to do. So but you should engage depending on the grant itself. If you're applying for something as well, like SPORE requires you to work with individuals and also a community group of people that are affected. So my thing has always been that I want to work with individuals, for instance, in the elderly, and I'm not talking when I say elders, I'm talking about the age groups, people who are with vulnerable medical situations and so on, and people that are generally, over 60 or over 80, depending on the vulnerability. So, but I like to involve them because I like to talk to them. And I also like to talk to their family if their family is part of it. So it really depends on what the question is or what the issue is. So I like to get individuals and kin, if they're certainly if there's caregivers involved. And certainly I won't never go in anywhere without telling people that this kind of stuff is in our communities anyway with the board. So ethically, you should let the political people know, and also, but in the urban areas it becomes a little different. But so people that are directly affected and people that are providing services, those become important. And that because you need to be able to develop a hub around, if it's public services, if you're developing a hub, you see the hub of services and getting them involved. And so it really does depend on what the issue is and who the, and what the area is.
Excellent. Thank you, Benita. We have another question for you, Benita, from Harvey. Who owns the research material that is being done in the Métis or First Nation community?
That's OCAP, of course. TCPS, it's pretty clear on that, and so is OCAP. That was the reason why OCAP started, and it started in health research. And I remember I was the health director at that time when all of this started, and back then it had to do with that very basic question. And for me, the ownership is upon the people that if I'm working with say a band or a tribal council or a group, I shouldn't say simple because nothing is ever simple, but you can do it through agreements. And through agreements, there are agreements where where you can identify what the dissemination is, what the dissemination rights are. If I'm collecting data, what can I share? What can't I share? And but the ownership is it comes in the form of an agreement, and it's with those people that are providing that knowledge. So and sometimes the where the issue comes in is who possesses it. In other words, it's stored, and usually they store it with the researcher if they don't have the storage area. And it goes into it really honestly depends on the people that you're working with.
Okay, thank you so much, Benita. There is one more question here in the Q&A, and I think I'm going to forward that to Candace. It's a really good transition here. What do you do if you accidentally do the wrong thing? So this is a question from Erica, by mistake.
Okay, so what is the question again? Sorry.
So Erica asks, what if you do the wrong thing by mistake?
And you're directing that to myself?
Yeah, I was just thinking it would be a good point to lead into what you said at the beginning, just bringing it back to the fact that we're all learning.
Yes, that's a really good point. So one of the things we talked about when we were setting up this workshop is I always say I like to speak from personal experience. And one of the things and the way that I approach, especially if I'm going to be working with a new elder or new traditional knowledge keeper, or even a new community, is really kind of, I call it humbling myself and approaching it in a way where I'm saying, I'm learning. I wanted to share that with this group as well, is that sometimes we are going to make mistakes, I'll say, and that one of the things we have to remember is that we're all learning and it is okay to ask questions. And so that's one of the reasons why as well we decided that these types of workshops and dialogue are important. So I hope that answers the question. So Naomi, what I'm going to do now is just move kind of into a very quick wrap up. And I want to thank all of our presenters today, and thank you very much for your participation. I want to thank everybody that joined us today. And I also want to thank the organizers, and in particular, I want to thank Naomi because for our very first workshop, we kind of went into that Zoom world. And so for this workshop, we were trying out a new format. And so there was a lot of time and effort put into really setting this up in a way that it works. And I think that the day went very nice. So thank you very much, Naomi. And I also just wanted to say that please look for our upcoming workshop for this University of Saskatchewan Indigenous Research Workshop Series. And so we're doing that for sometime in March. And so what we're going to do, it's being touched on a little bit here today. And so I think so watch for this one. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be, again, hosting that workshop in March. And so we will further explore the concepts of data stewardship and sovereignty, data mobilization, and OCAP. And so that's ownership, control, access, and protection. So with that, a big thank you again to everybody. And this concludes our workshop for today. Thank you very much.